Hello, everybody. I'm Jesse Waters, along with Emily Campagno, Juan Williams, Dana Perino, and Greg Gutfeld. It's 5 o'clock in New York City, and this is The Five. Fox News alert. It's been a busy 24 hours for the president as he tries to make a deal with Democrats on border security and the shutdown. But it looks like we're not getting very far. The president reportedly walking out of a meeting after he couldn't reach a deal with Democrats. It all started last night as he made his case to the American people.
Every day, Customs and Border Patrol agents encounter thousands of illegal immigrants trying to enter our country. Our southern border is a pipeline for vast quantities of illegal drugs. Over the years, thousands of Americans have been brutally killed by those who illegally entered our country, and thousands more lives will be lost if we don't act right now. This is a humanitarian crisis, a crisis of the heart and a crisis of the soul. The federal government remains shut down for one reason, and one reason only, because Democrats will not fund border security.
Today, he then had lunch on Capitol Hill with Republican lawmakers and doubled down on his demands.
The Republicans are unified. We want border security. We want safety for our country. The only reason they're against it is because I won the presidency. And they think they can try and hurt us going into the presidency, but that's not going to happen. And we don't give up because we're doing the right thing for our country.
But Democrats aren't budging. Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer just spoke after their meeting with Trump earlier today.
Unfortunately, the president just got up and walked out. He asked Speaker Pelosi, will you agree to my wall? She said no. And he just got up and said, then we have nothing to discuss, and he just walked out. I asked him to open up the government. He said, if I open up the government, you won't do what I want. A few minutes later, he sort of slammed the table. And when Leader Pelosi said she didn't agree with the wall, he just walked out and said, we have nothing to discuss.
Now, Vice President Pence says he doesn't recall him raising his voice or slamming his hand, and said the president actually walked into the room and passed out candy. But unfortunately for Democrats today, the headlines are all about Schumer and Pelosi's bizarre rebuttal last night, which put the internet on overdrive with hilarious memes of the leadership duo. One of the most popular ones was the American Gothic Pelosi and Schumer. Another popular one compares him to your angry parents finding out you've skipped school. And then there's this one asking if you need legal help for an accident. Greg, when you were watching last night and you saw these two people there, what was the first thing that went through your mind?
Well, first I thought they were trying to sell me a reverse mortgage. But, I mean, you'd have to go to the local cemetery to find anything stiffer. I mean, they were shellacked in Cialis. They could not move. And I was talking to somebody in the green room before. It was clear that this had been written regardless of whatever Trump was going to say. Right? So he didn't give them anything to actually improv or vamp off of. Everything he said was factually correct. And you could tell, even with the fact checking, how forlorn everybody was that they couldn't find any meat on that bone. So instead, you've got Lurch and Morticia. Is that the Addams Family? Or is that the Munsters? I always get them confused. Yeah. How would you know? You weren't even born then. Anyway,
Wednesday for Halloween.
What bothers me about this is that he brought candy.
Yeah.
And this is considered a peace offering, right?
Right.
And it's like, and then they just basically rebuffed him after giving him candy. We were talking about, you don't like Jolly Ranchers.
No, I used to like Jolly Ranchers, but there becomes an age when you can't really eat them anymore.
This was the original name for Brokeback Mountain. Did you know that?
I don't think I'm old enough. I think I'm still young enough to have a Jolly Rancher.
Take a Jolly Rancher.
I'll take a Jolly Rancher.
But I'm going to have Starburst.
I got the watermelon Jolly
orange
Rancher.
Starburst?
Juan, now, if I give you this from Greg, does this mean that you're going to agree with everything we want?
Yeah, rotten teeth and rotten. You know what's interesting?
You have a sweet tooth, Juan.
Oh, I really do. I love sweets. You know, but here's the thing that strikes me, and I think Greg picked up on this. There was nothing. Trump said nothing.
But I said that in a good way.
Well, I'm just saying, yeah, because you're glad he said nothing. But I mean,
no, what do you mean he talked about all the casualties, the victims?
Here's the thing. It was a national address that the networks got suckered into, oh, the president's asked for national time. Well, I guess he's going to make news, but he makes zero news.
I don't think the president has to make news.
I think I think that is the reason that you get time.
He stated the facts.
Well, he didn't state the facts. I mean, this is a guy.
The statistics were pretty clear.
Oh, there's a national crisis when crossings are at a 20-year low.
Washington Post said that too.
Oh,
per Jesse yesterday.
Low. And I mean, and then he says, oh, you know, guess what? Heroin's coming across. Yeah, coming across, not illegally in terms of illegal crossings, but coming through ports of
both places.
This is all true. No,
both places.
You know, this is a guy who says we have a situation here where the trade deal is going to pay for the wall. Nobody thinks a trade deal is paying for the wall, and certainly Mexico is not paying for the wall. So to me, it was like,
do you want to counter the port of entry argument?
I would like to do the port of entry because I knew you were going to bring that up, Juan.
I know, because this guy.
And I'll give you this. I will give you this.
Yes, go ahead.
They seized, Border Patrol agents seized 1,300 pounds of fentanyl at the ports of entry on the southern border, but they also seized 332 pounds of fentanyl along the southern border.
But Jesse,
that's a lot of fentanyl.
Jesse, you're missing the reason why it's at port. The reason why it's at the port of entry is because that's often the easier path once you have barriers. So it actually moves it to port of entry.
Wait a minute, I thought you did. He wants the wall. So
yes.
In other words,
it ends up moving.
It's coming through legal ports.
So you hit both.
Point, I think we're in the weeds, and I think this is what Trump does to the whole country. He gets you all of a sudden like arguing about, well, where's this coming? Where's that not coming? There is no crisis. That's the point.
Okay, well,
then you're in the minority, Juan, because the Washington Post said 2 days ago that...
Listen, I'm just talking facts.
Are you calling the Washington Post fake news?
No, I'm telling you the actual fact. And here's the thing.
There's no crisis. People are dying. No crisis.
No, what people dying? That's another
2 children died.
Oh, get out of here.
The police officer Singh the other day was shot by an illegal alien.
I gotta say, listen, if this is, and this is the part I liked about what President Trump had to say. He talked about humanitarian issues, right?
But I thought there was no humanitarian issues.
Well, I don't know.
I thought there was no crisis.
If it's a humanitarian crisis...
First there was no crisis, now there's a crisis.
Well,
you're cherry-picking. Eat some candy, Juan.
Because if it's humanitarian, why was it not a crisis 2 years ago when Republicans had control of everything?
All right, let's get into Dana here. What do you think, Dana?
I don't know. I was having fun listening to you all. Okay, so I did think of something, though. Do you remember when President Obama gave the primetime address on the Affordable Care Act?
How can I forget?
Yeah. Okay. what did Republicans... remember we sat here like, oh, that's not true, and that's not going to work, and that's not the case, and it's not the... Okay, well, here's the thing. He had enough numbers to get that passed. Mm-hmm. He paid a political price for it. I think the jury is still out on that. It's not solved all the problems that they thought it was going to, but that's what happens in these things. I actually think presidents, even if they're not going to make news, if the president says, I want to address the nation, that the networks and the cable, they should give that, because it's not like he asks all the time. This is his first Oval Office address, and he chose to do it on immigration. You can choose to think that the speech didn't move the ball. You can choose to think that the speech was factually incorrect. But I do think that the networks did the right thing in taking the speech, and that he gets this reputation for being someone who walks around the White House fuming all the time. And Chuck Schumer, even today, says he's pounding the table. And the White House tries to show, no, actually, he's quite rational. And
he brings candy.
He even brought candy. Like, he's so nice. He's a father and he's a grandfather. I don't think that they made a big dent in moving anything either way. So we're at an impasse. But I do think this is interesting that it's $5 billion. I'm going to say just $5 billion in the big scheme of things of the budget. On Friday, when the payroll doesn't go out, it's more than $5 billion. So I think that we've lost a little bit of perspective here.
Was the Obama address to the nation the one where he said, if you like your health care, you can keep it?
I'm sure, well, he said it a million times.
I think that was that one. Emily, what did you think about last night and the Democratic response, if you can call it that?
I think... So I've been a federal attorney. You guys know. You continue to question it, but I promise I won't.
I've yet to see any proof.
Any questions?
Show us your resume.
And I've been furloughed, and I've handed out furlough papers. And that pales in comparison to me in seriousness of the day that I was sitting in charge as a managing director of 55 federal employees. There were gunshots outside of my window, and there was an active shooter running around because I was responsible for their safety of them and me. So I don't understand why Pelosi and Schumer threw around comments comments today, just today, for example, in their response, saying the words tragic and collateral damage, talking about the furlough, when that's a disingenuous comment when our federal employees are being assaulted and murdered at the border, when our communities, our Midwestern and low-income and minority communities and more are being decimated by the drug war, by the drugs pouring over the southern border. I encourage you and everyone to read the 2018 DEA Drug Threat Assessment Report, which categorized and was quite clear about the level of prolificness that drugs are flowing across the borders in both ports of entry and not, and the crippling effect that those transnational narco cartels have on literally everything in our system, including our prison population, and including diplomacy and bureaucracy and policy and entire towns that are literally in the palms of their hands. So when they say, oh, the wall's a morality issue, or they talk about this, all of these government employees at the moment, there's, to me, greater consequences that we're dealing with right now that are being lost in that oversimplified response to the national conversation.
Emily, how does a wall solve that? If the drugs are coming through legal ports of entry, the wall is not going to solve that.
Not all of them, Juan.
To address that, number one, the president isn't just talking about a fiscal barrier, but he's also called for funding for technology, for greater reinforcements for border
Democrats
agents,
are willing
for
to,
judges, for immigration judges, support staff,
What the Democrats said today is, if you're talking about additional funds and forces on the border to deal with things like that, Emily, we'll negotiate. But let's not put the wall out there. Let's not shut down the government over this
personal.
charade.
Let's face it.
For the same wall that they voted 4 or 5 years ago.
46 miles of wall.
I think what Emily's saying is that the Democrats care more about Americans missing paychecks than Americans missing dead family members.
Oh, is that
it? It's a priority problem. All right.
46 miles of wall in San Diego.
It girl, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, on a tear after the president's speech. Wait till you hear some of the things she said next.
A lot of reaction to the president's speech last night, but none more worthy of its own segment than that of new Democratic Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. And here's why.
The president should not be asking for more money to an agency that has systematically violated human rights. The president should be really defending why we are funding such an agency at all. Because right now what we are seeing is death. Right now what we are seeing is the violation of human rights.
But she didn't just stop at that, slamming ICE. She took it to a whole other level with this.
He's fighting against almost every way that people can actually legally enter this country, forcing them to become undocumented, and then he's trying to attack their undocumented status. This is systematic, it is wrong, and it is anti-American. Those women and children trying to come here with nothing but the shirts on their back to create an opportunity and to provide for this nation are acting more in an American tradition than this president is right now.
All right, Jesse, she was subjected to some journalistic criticism over this, obviously, and defended herself against being called vacuous. How do you reconcile, how would she reconcile that with such seemingly arguable, mindless comments?
Well, as someone who's been called vacuous, I can sympathize with that. I'm getting AOC fatigue. She's everywhere. She's on 60 Minutes. She's on MSNBC. She's all over the internet. I'm kind of over it already. Think about what she's saying. She's saying that the illegal aliens are more American than the president of the United States. She's a reverse birther. Okay? It's the opposite of what Trump said. And now she's saying that ICE agents are committing human rights violations. ICE agents are the actual people that apprehend illegal immigrants for committing human rights violations like child sex trafficking and homicide and things like that. She's saying in the midst of decades best wage growth, GDP growth, and unemployment. Hey, you know what? Capitalism isn't working. Let's try socialism. It's the kind of stuff you hear your average college Democrat say, and you kind of just roll your eyes. But now she's a member of Congress. Training wheels are off. She's popping wheelies through the country, throwing hand grenades out there. She's a problem, not for Republicans. She's a problem for Pelosi. That's what I think.
I think it's a problem for Schumer more than for Pelosi.
Chuck or Nancy, whoever.
Well, I think she's a delight for Republicans, apparently.
Well, she's good for ratings here at Fox.
I think all over the conservative media universe, they seem to delight in, what do they call it, AOC now? But I must tell you, though, guess what? The American people agree with her.
Oh, we are a socialist country now? I didn't know that.
I'm saying in terms of the American people say the Republicans are responsible for the shutdown. And secondly, that when it comes to separating families and children from parents, Americans don't like it. Americans think
they want to open borders.
Americans want to abolish ICE.
I think when people say, oh, you know what? These people come and sometimes scare families and workers with these raids. Remember when Republicans said about ATF jackbooted thugs? Well, guess what? Imagine if you're an immigrant and you see your grandmother or your cousin being raided and taken away. You say, oh, my God. So
I think Republicans said that when the guns were sold to Mexican drug cartels that killed a border agent
here. You missed the news.
I think no, that was the news one.
Dana, you were saying that it's more of a problem for Schumer.
Yes, I just think so. The Democrats are already trying to get their 2020 game going, and they're super hopeful. They think that they can make Trump a one-term president. Well, okay, so we'll see how that goes. But if they don't win back the Senate, they will not be in a position of power. It is really difficult. And I think that for Pelosi, where the energy is in the party right now, it helps in the House to have AOC out there and all of these things that they don't really have to defend them that much. But if you actually want to have power in the country, you have to win back the Senate. And I think that the more she's out there, the more difficult it is for Chuck Schumer to try to make any gains on the Republicans, and that they're more likely, in the 2020, Republicans more likely to keep the Senate or actually even expand the number of seats that they have.
Greg?
Yes.
What would the messaging be for compassionate, more moderate Democrats who don't agree that the human rights violations and that there's just death with ICE and that there's some type of moderate ground that includes the reality of the human rights violations being committed by those being apprehended by those at the border, et cetera?
I don't want to help them out. No, I would actually say that you know, she's okay. She is the Democratic Party's Trump in the sense that she is galvanizing social media via extreme and memorable pronouncements. Every morning she gets up and she says, "What's my locker up? What's my build the wall?" And she comes up with something every day that like ends up on shows like this. But I think she's betraying her constituency. Illegal immigration affects the wages. It affects the job market of minorities. That is a stone cold fact. And it is, Juan, it is. And yes.
I think what's a stone cold fact is that immigration actually helps economic growth.
Legal. Yes, legal.
Illegal feeds into systems that then result in categorically low wages and non-compliance and lack of benefits and lack of the things that people on the left
This reminds me of like Mitt Romney's gardeners and Trump people at Trump's properties being said, oh yeah, I guess we're illegal immigrants. Oh.
Well, I don't follow that.
Oh,
That's what I was saying. What I'm saying is that
cabbages?
cheap labor hurts minorities or people that are on the lower rung of the ladder trying to get a job. You can puff all you want, Juan. That's a fact.
Oh, yeah. So
the problem is, but let me finish, Juan, because you talked a bit.
Okay.
We have to get over the fact of they're going to accuse you of being sexist if you criticize her. It's actually sexist if you don't criticize her. Yep. You got to go up and you got to say your ideas are old, you're refreshing in your delivery, you're young, you're exciting, but your ideas are as dead as the socialism of the past.
But you know what? She's doing something, and she's not taking the traditional heat that you'd expect when you call a sitting president un-American.
Yeah.
Or you advocate for socialism, or you demean law enforcement. A couple of years ago, I'm old enough to remember doing those things. You'd get hit pretty hard. And now, I mean, this is like from the Bill de Blasio school of Democrats.
I think, though, that had been done to Obama by isolated Republicans, congressmen, a few congressmen. I think we can remember accusing President Obama of not being American and all that stuff. So I think.
And they got hurt for that.
Yeah, there's a mirror.
They got hurt for that.
There is a mirror image to everything on these parties. That's the sad thing, is that one side does exactly what the other side does. That's why there's so much redundancy.
I think they should have had her do the response, because then they would have had an ability to communicate with her a little bit and to channel it and to take all of this great energy and try to put it in the direction that they want.
I preferred the Nancy and Chuck response. That was a much better idea.
All right, we got to go. Remember, embattled Sheriff Scott Israel, who some say botched the response of the Parkland High School shooting. A major update on him next.
Mood music. It's been almost a year since gunmen opened fire at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida, and that gunman left 17 people dead. New reports now saying disgraced Broward County Sheriff Scott Israel is telling his top staff that he's being suspended over the quality or lack of quality in the response to the tragedy. But is he? New Florida Governor Rick DeSantis addressed the issue earlier today.
In Florida, the governor has the ability to suspend local officials for incompetence, for misfeasance, for neglect of duty. We just had, a few days ago, last week, a comprehensive report from the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas Commission. It was over 400 pages. It was really troubling to read some of the things that could have been done to prevent one of the most awful tragedies we've had. We will make an announcement on that probably by the end of the week.
Wow, so Ron DeSantis is saying, Emily, that he hasn't made a decision, but apparently what we're hearing from the sheriff is that he thinks that this is a fait accompli.
I will say that in a vacuum, if your tax dollars were being used to pay someone's salary of over $186,000, and in that person's job performance, there was a demonstrable, via that 500-page report, and there's also a subsequent criminal investigation and another public commission report as well that came out, but that in those reports, it outlined that that person's failures, incompetence, lack of training, lack of equipment, change of policy from shell going to May. Literally, it highlighted like 10 things that resulted or that impacted and affected the deaths of 17 students. Absolutely, I call for that removal, and I think our government would probably be a lot more efficient if there was more accountability like that. Again, it's our tax dollars paying these salaries, and that entire situation is a horror.
So, Jesse, you've been out front on this one, calling for him to be removed, but the counter-argument to all that Emily just said is that the voters should decide.
Well, if it's an egregious situation like this is, I think the government has the authority to cut him loose, and he should. They're cleaning house in Broward. They got rid of Sneaky Snipes, and now the coward from Broward is gone by the end of the week, we predict. Because remember what he did, Juan. This guy was playing patty cake with the school shooter for years, visiting his house like, what, 3 dozen times, never doing anything. They heard shots. Everybody forms a perimeter, fools around on the walkie-talkies while kids are being mowed down. His own deputy there ran away from the gunfire instead of toward it. And then afterwards, he got out of the town hall and then blamed the NRA. The guy is a political animal. And he's got blood on his hands. And I'm glad he's finally going to get a job in the private sector. CNN will probably hire him.
One quick point to you.
As a
would you say
law enforcement consultant.
Would you say the same thing about the FBI, which also had warnings?
I think heads should fall at the FBI, too, because I think they had 2 warnings, as I recall. And they also had, I think, a Department of Child and Family Services. They dropped the ball as well. It's just amazing you can stick around in government and not get fired. I mean, you have people like Peter Strzok or Lois Lerner or this guy. They disgrace their entire institution, and they can hang around for years before they're get fired. It's cushy. I should work in government once.
Yeah.
That'd be a lot safer.
Is that right?
Yes.
I won't make any comment. So, Dana, when you read about this, Jesse touched on this, people saying, oh, so you're going to get rid of this law enforcement officer, but you don't respond in terms of guns. What do you say?
Oh, you mean that DeSantis is not moving forward on legislation?
Yeah, no, well, he's
been there about 10
remember
minutes.
They did something about gun stocks, I think, and
yeah.
But the fact is, I was just reading here, 40,000 people in the U.S. died from firearm deaths in 2017, the highest since 1968.
Okay, so Governor DeSantis has been governor for like 10 minutes.
Right.
Okay, so the first thing that he gets in regards to this high school shooting is this report. It's 400 pages. And to me, it sounds like he's being quite responsible, looking at the report and going to make a decision based on that, not based on an instinct or a grudge or anything like that. And let's give him a chance to think that there is something that he thinks that should be done on guns in Florida. The legislature, actually under Governor Rick Scott, now Senator, they actually did move some legislation just last year. So I think we should just give him a chance. He's only been there a minute.
So, Greg, I'm struck by this because, you know, to me, you're a guy who would always support the right of democracy, let the voters decide. But this would be an executive action. Apparently, he has the right, but what do you think?
I think that if he had any kind of self-respect, he would have resigned immediately because the evidence was overwhelming. I mean, remember, this guy's a stereotype. He's like, he's this power-hungry, arrogant cliche of like a TV sheriff strutting before the cameras after that heinous act took place. Remember those long press conferences that he would soak it up, just soaked it up. And to your point, Jesse, I will never forget that town hall on CNN with Dana Lash.
Yeah.
She went out there and was thrown before the wolves, figuratively speaking, and he sat there. And instead of trying to throw her a lifeline, he threw her an anvil. He actually made a comment that engendered all this applause. That it was basically saying, "Yeah, you're the one that's at fault," and he was the one, as you said, with blood on your hands. If he had just the same passion for the citizens that he did for the limelight, those kids would be alive.
Well, you know what struck me was, I think, the arrogance thing, because I also wrote a quote here. He was on CNN and said, "If ifs and buts were candy and nuts,
Yes.
O.J. Simpson would still be in the record books." And to make excuses for the fact that the training and the radio equipment was faulty.
Yeah.
Anyway, the media wasted no time dissecting the president's speech last night. Gregory, yes. Gregory's going to break down their fact-checking. Stay tuned for that on The Five.
Fact check their fact check. My favorite part from last night, the flurry of fact checking.
Fact checkers, eat your Wheaties today.
Yeah, we'll be fact-checking relentlessly.
They have to have real-time fact-checking.
Setting the scene for an address that will test the fact-checkers later on tonight.
What sheep. Sadly, the dizzy anticipation overwhelmed the payoff. Afterward, the media seemed so deflated, they had to turn to their late-night booty call, collusion. It's always there for them. Oh, they still tried to fact check, but it was hard because the stats were real and they were sobering. Like when Donald Trump detailed the murder of a young police officer, a dismembered neighbor, gang members stabbing a young girl to death. Those, sadly, are facts. Also hard to question, the 266,000 arrests of aliens with criminal records, the 100,000 assaults, 30,000 sex crimes, 4,000 violent killings, the 1 in 3 women sexually assaulted on the trek through Mexico, or the 20,000 migrant children illegally brought into the U.S. last month, many used by coyotes and gangs. Those were facts ignored by the media and, of course, by Ma and Pa Kettle. Trump had put them in a fact-checked box. But the best overreach, there's a bona fide emergency on the border, said the Washington Post just days ago. Jesse brought it up here yesterday. Then when Trump brought up this humanitarian crisis, the same paper called him a liar. Was it because he used their analysis? No wonder nobody pays attention to these so-called fact checkers. They don't even trust what they say to themselves, and neither do we. Thoughts, Dana?
Well,
Thanks, Jesse. No, I'm kidding. They said I didn't have time. Go
there
ahead.
was so much buildup to the speech
Yes.
that by the time the speech was given, it was anticlimactic.
It was.
If the president had announced a national emergency, that would have been like, wow, okay, there's news. Instead, because it was, if you're covering this every day, there was really nothing new, but he put it all together in one place. This was a speech that was more geared toward the broader public who doesn't pay attention to this stuff all the time, and that's what it was supposed to do. Plus, what journalists do is fact-checking. You don't have to specifically say, I'm going to fact-check now. You just do your job because that's what you do.
See, you know what I found, Emily? That they portrayed their rebuttal as a fact check. They disagreed with what he said. Then they would go like, oh, but it's coming through port of entry. So yeah, that's probably because there's a wall that kept it from somewhere else. That's a rebuttal. It's not a fact check.
Yes to that, and I also think that there was a missed opportunity to take it to kind of get out of that mired in the details and just talk about the larger issues and how in fact it would roll out in terms of policy. Because remember, the whole point too was, and tomorrow the Democrats are meeting him at the White House to maybe come to an agreement within an hour. And so, and of course accuracy is important, but I just think it became its own flurry and kind of ridiculous.
Yeah, Jesse, I want to bring up John Avlon. He tweeted, he's CNN, I believe, correct? CNN? So the view from the Oval Office seems to be most documented migrants are murderers, drug dealers, thugs, and drug traffickers. Trump never said that.
No.
He just went over statistics. Right. That's their problem. They are completely biased, and they think that their bias is somehow a sieve for fact-checking.
So here's what they'll do. They'll say, well, illegal immigrants commit less crimes than the average American citizen. That's like saying crack kills less people than heroin. It doesn't mean you don't fight the crack epidemic. Police officers go after crimes. They don't go after people. So when you reduce illegal immigration, you will therefore reduce crime. I also don't like when they say this is a manufactured crisis, okay? Juan says, you know, in 2000, there were 100,000 illegal border crossings per month. Now there are 60,000 border crossings per month. That's like saying my home got broken into in 2005 times, and now it gets broken into 3 times. It doesn't mean you don't do anything about securing your home. They're just trying to ignore the problem. Another statistic, which is pretty amazing, Trump said last night that 1 in 3 women, when they make the journey north, gets raped when they're trying to come to America. The fact checkers came out and actually said it's 4 in 5 women get raped. 70%. So when you add that to the fact that there's sick kids now being held because you can't send them back because they're from Central America and they come with families because of the legal loopholes, that the assaults on Border Patrol agents are up 300%, and an Officer Singh killed by an illegal immigrant the other day. To say that that's a manufactured crisis, but global warming is a real crisis. How many Americans have died from global warming, Juan?
Wow. You know,
how many, Williams?
I tell you what.
How many?
I think your brain, your brain might be fried on it, on that global warming.
Okay.
Okay, so here's the thing. You know what? I agree with Dana. I think journalists should check facts from these powerful people when they speak from the bully pulpit.
But so not if they're biased, if they're rebuttals.
Listen, there's no need for bias. Check the facts. But the way you guys present the facts, for example, that crossings are at a 20 years low, you say, oh, so what if it's, well, if it's at a 20-year low, and you say, well, that still is a crisis, well, then what happened when the Republicans were in control of everything and did nothing about this so-called crisis? I think most people, maybe like Stormy Daniels said, I prefer folding laundry. Or maybe like people say, what's the president squinting at there? He's squinting at the teleprompter. It just wasn't him last night, and he made no news. And so when you say, why fact check? I'll tell you why, because this guy has been demonizing people who are immigrants and then saying lies about those immigrants, and then he gets a national address, and everybody says, well, we got to check him for the lies.
We got to move on. I just don't understand why the left conflates illegal immigrants with legal immigrants. We'll save that for another day. Don't go anyway. Wild Card Wednesday is next.